everybody, and welcome back. I'm Hillary Raimo. You're listening to Matters from My Body and Spirit Talk Radio. We have a very special guest joining us once again. Barbara Clow returns to discuss the current placing of the Mayan calendar and how it relates to our everyday life and current events. I bring Barbara on during very specific times of the year. Actually, I have her tell me when it's important to come on because she has a very special message for all of us, and she's going to be talking to us today about just that. She's an international Mayan elder, Cherokee record keeper, and internationally acclaimed ceremonial teacher and author. And she has written several wonderful, fabulous books. Her website is handclow2012.com. There's a link on my radio homepage as well as my website if you'd like to check out her work while you're listening. So welcome. Welcome, Barbara.
Hi, Hillary.
I'm so excited.
So am I, actually.
Okay, so...
You're the person I want to talk to right now.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking that the other day. I was very excited that this show was coming up, and I have to tell you, and I have to tell everybody listening, that Barbara does a fabulous astrology write-up on her website, on her auto flash page, and I do post it on my Facebook, and I have a link on my website as well to that, from the new moon to the new moon, and she talks about the cycles and gives wonderful, great information so that it can keep you updated in between shows, because I'll be bringing Barbara on all the way through as long as I'm on the air, that so we can talk about these different placements. So Barbara, why don't you pick where we're going to start? What's really going on right now?
Yeah, I'm in the middle of a really profound process right now because, first of all, we've all been living with Mars retrograde for the last couple of months, and Mars goes direct about a half an hour after we talk on the phone. And with Mars retrograde, first of all, it drags us back through. Mars rules action and energy and getting the job done and using our power. And so when Mars goes retrograde, it drags us into the subconscious levels that are going on. You know, we have this conscious level of behavior, and then as we roll along every day, there's all this subconscious stuff going on. So the Mars retrograde forced us into this deep dragging back through all these old issues that have to do with war and aggression and civilizational change and stuff like that. And so because I wrote such a major book about that issue, I'm referring to Catastrophobia, and Catastrophobia is an investigation of the last 15,000 years, basically, of Earth changes on the planet and how they've affected human consciousness. And so where we are in terms of the Mayan calendar right now is we're in the middle of night 6, as you know. So we're in the middle of a Mars retrograde, which is ending right after this show. And then we're also in the middle of night 6 of the galactic underworld. And night 6 of the galactic underworld corresponds exactly to the time period I investigated in Catastrophobia. So I wrote Catastrophobia between 1998 and 2000. It was published in 2001. And I had no idea, to tell you the truth, what I was really doing there. I mean, I knew I was investigating the psychological and emotional consequences of a period of cataclysms on our planet, which was about maybe 16,000 years ago up until about maybe 8,000 years ago, something like that. But what I didn't realize when I was doing all of that is what I was investigating was night 6 of the regional underworld. Now, the regional underworld is a 100,000-year-long period of time, and the regional underworld is mostly characterized by the kind of vibrations that James Cameron created in Avatar. It was mostly a period of our species being at one with nature and at one with the planet, and it pretty much was a pretty special time for all of us. And then these cataclysms started about 16,000 years ago, and they ripped us out of this attunement and at one with nature, and then we've been struggling with the consequences of all that ever since. So I hope I'm not sounding too confusing here, because I'm busy putting together a very complex hologram. But during night 6 of the galactic, which is this year, we are reliving that cataclysmic phase in our subconscious minds. Then Mars went retrograde and dragged us deeply through all of this consciousness. And so to keep our listeners with us, because this is also complicated, most people have just had a terrible time for the last 2 months, 6 weeks to 2 months, maybe 2.5 months, where it just seems like every dragon that you thought you'd come to a resolution with was back in your face again. A lot of people have been very tired. A lot of people have felt like life wasn't worth living. And what it is that our subconscious minds are just being processed at such a deep level. So that's what I'm thinking about right now.
So basically, the self-healing process is being enhanced, right?
That's true. It is. But it's so, because here's the problem, Hillary, and the reason I wrote Catastrophobia. And I wrote Catastrophobia initially because my Cherokee grandfather wanted me to do it. And it was a project of this life that was kind of like a dedication to the record keeping, which is what I was given as a child. And it was a terribly difficult period, a book to write, because number one, it involved 15 to 20,000 years of time. And number two, I had to work with a couple of Oxford scientists in order to write the book, because my geology and earth changes and geographical information had to be correct. In other words, I had to have the correct data bank, and then I was speculating on how the events affected all of us as a species. So the problem that I've been dealing with my whole life really is that the scientific story about the last 20,000 years has been extremely incorrect for the most part, or at the very least, the story that people are given at the sort of educational popular level is definitely incorrect. And there seems to be a huge resistance in the scientific community to getting more clear about what has gone on during the last 20,000 years. And I think the reason for that, in other words, during our lifetime and during our education, finally when I was about 35 or 40 years old, people started talking about the cataclysm 65 million years ago, which was the extinction of the dinosaurs. And so during my lifetime, this issue has come up, and people and scientists have accepted the fact that cataclysms do occur on our planet. They finally got to the point. For 150 years, the idea in science was that everything's just slow and gradual, and there's really nothing to worry about. And what has happened during our lifetime, or people who were born since the 1930s and 40s and 50s, is that the real story is that there are periodic cataclysms. So that's number one. But then what happened in science was they kept on looking at all the cataclysms way, way, way back in the past, and they've done everything they could not to look at the more recent ones. So I found these two Oxford scientists. One is a science historian and the other one is a geologist, who had written the premier book on the cataclysms during the last 20,000 years. And then I collaborated with them because I finally found two guys who had the right data bank, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. And access to their book has been terribly suppressed. And Catastrophobia has not sold as well as I think it should, considering its importance. And here's the reason. There is so much psychological resistance to facing up to what happened during the last 15 or 20,000 years that people just do everything they can to stuff it. So the reason we're having such a hard time right now is people don't have the right story. And so when they feel all these weird feelings, like let's give you a clear example. In terms of the scientific data bank, we're about, I just have to get it to be really close, but we're in the middle of night 6 of the galactic underworld, which is basically 2010. And so during March and April of 2010, which is where we are now, we are at the same point as we were at on this planet during the Younger Dryas. That's a geological period. And that period goes from about, I'd say 11,000 BC to about 9,500 BC would be pretty good. I didn't write all these dates down. But basically, we correspond with that period. And what happened with the Younger Dryas is we went into a weather catastrophe. And what triggered it was just before that period, which corresponds to February. Like, we just finished February 2010. Thank God we got through it. Because during February 2010, the time period corresponds with the Vela supernova fragments coming into our solar system. And when fragments from the Vela supernova, which is a fairly close supernova, started coming into our planet, what started happening is we started having extreme disturbances in the solar system. Not as great as 9500 BC. The pinnacle of all of this is 9500 BC, which we'll look at in a moment. So we're at that point right now where the fragments have been coming in and the solar system was disturbed. And now during March, we're in this period that corresponds to the Younger Dryas. And so what our planet did basically during the Younger Dryas, once these fragments started affecting it, is our planet went into an extreme frigid cold snap. And this was one of the periods when the ice really built up on our planet. So look what's going on in Europe this winter. Look at what's happening in, for instance, the canals froze in Amsterdam, and there was so much ice in the Baltic that ships were trapped, and Madeira had terrible floods. France and Germany had absolutely horrible weather. And so people would tend to feel like the current is switching. Another issue going on for us is there's an issue of the warm current that keeps the European weather livable for people. And some people might think that the current is actually slowing down and stopping. It may or may not be. We may just be resonating with this previous period in time. Am I making sense?
Oh yeah, totally.
Okay, because to me, first of all, one of the things the other thing I do in my life is I'm a teacher and an astrologer. And I don't like to get into stuff that's really fear-ridden and potentially could scare people, because I don't like to look at stuff unless there's a solution for it, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. And so what I'm getting at here is that a lot of what we're feeling is actually psychic and not real. However, we can't ignore what's happening with the weather, and we can't ignore the fact that there's been a major quake almost every 3 or 4 days now. Started in Haiti, and then once it happened off of South America, off of Santiago, we've been having a fairly major quake almost every 3 or 4 days. And so the planet during the galactic underworld, now first of all, our planet is alive. Gaia is alive, and Gaia responds to us and responds to our feelings. And so the planet may be responding to our feelings, or the galactic underworld may actually be triggering a physical resonance with this cataclysmic phase. Whatever it is, the thing that's going to help people the most is to try to get a better grasp on what's happening to people subconsciously. And it's a really big deal. Like this morning, see if I can find this. I was rereading the foreword to Catastrophobia just to see what Alan and Dallaire had to say. In other words, I wrote this book with two scientists, and then they wrote a foreword for me. And so here's what they say about this period and how it affects us at this point right now. And what they say is that once these cataclysms happened, then, and I'll quote them, a great and varied raft of penitentiary and propitiatory practices began on the part of our species. Thus, guilt, penance, and sacrifice. This period they're talking about is about 11,000 years ago. This is when it starts. In other words, like what I'm describing is what it creates in us, because now what's happening is we're processing all of this stuff. And so they say this guilt, penance, and sacrifice became mainstays of practically all the many religions and cults that arose following the initiation of the Holocene epoch. Now that's 9500 BC to now. In other words, that's the period that we're living in now. Mm-hmm. And assumed guilt to explain the need for retributional catastrophe, voluntary penance to atone for the imagined sin, and eager sacrifice to hopefully avert a repetition of divine cleansing. So what we're talking about here is we've had like 11,500 years of those kinds of psychological attitudes, fear that it'll happen again, and so then creating religions and creating methods to avert disaster. You following me?
Yeah.
Okay. So what I'm trying to say is that where we are right now, that we're before that period where the cataclysm, it corresponds where the cataclysms are actually happening. So the way we're feeling inside is we're just feeling all of this intense energy. You could say that what we're dealing with, we're feeling, is we've had 11,500 years of weird coping mechanisms to avoid the fear. But now, regardless of everything we've ever done, the fear is right in our face. And then the Mars retrograde I got to tell you, Hillary, I am so happy that I decided to write Handclaw 2012. I started the website in 2002. And what it does is it combines the Mayan calendar theory of Carl Kalaman, the days and nights of the galactic underworld, with astrology. And so I just simply use astrology to try to examine how we might respond to a particular period in time. So when I look at this issue of processing night 6 of the regional, that's the 100,000-year underworld, when I look at processing those issues during this year, then I wouldn't see an awful lot if I didn't also include Mars retrograde. You see that?
And so what I was thinking as you were talking was the fact that the fear, the fear-based mentality and how it affects the planet and us has been so supported by mainstream society and culture, by those in power, all of that stuff have just cultivated a massive cauldron, if you will, of fear potion that they just feed up on a regular basis. Right. So we have our own processing, and then we also have the general, feel of our culture processing on top of it, because we almost have to really dig through those layers of what we're kind of spoon-fed and then deal with us on top of it. So we're kind of bombarded with this really heavy fear stuff.
Yeah, and then as I started this discussion, I started it with the fact that the scientific community has tried to avoid giving us the real story here for the last 20,000 years. And, of course, when I got into that back in the late 90s, I didn't see the implications of what it would have during 2010, if you get my drift. Mm-hmm. And so, number one, they've avoided giving us the real story, and I think it's been a conspiracy. In fact, I'm sure it is. It would take me so much work to document it. I just don't have the energy, but I'm sure it's a conspiracy. And then on top of that, the other thing that I did in Catastrophobia, I at least got this part of the job done, is I traced through Catastrophobia how the global elite, the consortium of power on the planet, how they emerged after the cataclysm. Now, the culmination of all these cataclysms was 9500 BC. So in terms of where we are in the galactic underworld during March and April, we're still in the cataclysmic period and terrible weather and a lot of convulsion on the planet. But then in 9500 BC, one of the fragments just really smashed the solar system and actually disarranged the orbits and axial tilt of a lot of the planets in our solar system. So when we look at 9500 BC, in terms of our current moment, we're looking at May 2010. I want you to know that. So the big peak of this processing of inner fear is going to be May 2010. So the other thing that I did in Catastrophobia was I looked at why the global elite emerged in the first place, and the basic idea is that after the 9500 BC cataclysm, practically the only people on the planet who seem to have survived were the people who were members of the global maritime civilization. And I have adopted, along with Graham Hancock, the belief that we were a fairly advanced civilization on this planet around 20,000 years ago. This would be during day 6 in terms of the regional underworld. And so when everything really hit hard, the people in the boats were the ones who mainly survived, and they were known as the Atlanteans. And so this is the Atlantean culture. So this is why we have so much talk about Atlantis, and this is why we have such a total cover-up on the part of the academic and media community regarding discussing Atlantis. Anybody who talks about Atlantis is an idiot, right? But the problem with that is Atlantis was an advanced civilization that was destroyed about 11,500 years ago, and we're living with consequences of that. But what happened was the people who were in boats and who were part of the maritime civilization survived the cataclysm better than the people did on the land. And so then what happened is at that point we started the whole structure of having dominant people controlling people who are helpless. And we have a period of cataclysm. Well, it's the post-cataclysm is like 9,500 BC to about 6,000 BC, and this is a period when people were just practically knocked back to the Stone Age from one point of view. But there were dominant parts of the culture, and those dominant cultures evolved into the global elite. And this isn't necessarily a negative thing, because somebody had to do something, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. But then what I traced in Catastrophobia is I traced very carefully all the way through how the global elite started misusing power in order to control humanity. And they did that because it was a desperate, if you go back to the cataclysmic recovery period, they were desperate, because what was anybody going to do? But now it has evolved into a situation that you described so extremely well, which is they know the real story, the global elite. I'm convinced that they know all about the Mayan calendar and all about Kalaman's system. I'm absolutely convinced that they know as much about this and more than even probably you and I do. But what they've done is they have used fear in order to control the human race. And so now that we're living in the middle of a period of intense processing of fear complexes, it's coming to just a ridiculous level. And there may be even more going on than that, Hillary. A lot of scientists right now are speculating that the earthquakes are being triggered by HAARP. Have you heard this?
Oh, yeah. I was going to ask you about that. I was going to ask what you thought about that, because that's a really big, hot topic in the circles I run in right now, sure.
Yeah, so to tie it into what we're talking about, wouldn't it make sense that if they really want the fear to peak right now, they might even add a little bit of extra help and trigger some earthquakes? And why not trigger them in places like Haiti, where the basic mentality of the global elite would be to just wipe certain people off the planet? I hate to say it.
Well, it's population control. It's how they look at the world.
So I don't know I haven't been able to follow in the last month. I know Alfred Weber did a radio show sometime in early February with a group of scientists regarding HAARP, which I've not. Maybe you've heard that. I haven't been able to listen to it yet. But I think that it's possible that's what's going on. But I think what all of us have to concentrate on, unless somebody unfortunately is living in Valparaiso, I think what we have to concentrate on is what's going on inside us. And I really recommend that people consider reading Catastrophobia. As you know, I'm not famous for asking people to read my books, but there really is no other book that is attempting to consider the psychological implications of these great earth changes that are so recent for us.
It's really a profound book. In fact, I just finished reading it again over the last couple months as we move into some of these changes. And I think that the material that you present in there is absolutely astounding and eye-opening and really relates to a lot of what everybody's going through. So it is a very, very fabulous book. That and the Mayan Code, I think the two books are really important to get through right now to understand. And Coleman's book, his new one, is phenomenal. And I did order that, and I've been reading that too. And so, I always tell people, because everybody gets upset and they say, well, what can we do? And then they kind of give up because they don't really think that they can affect everything. And that's where I always bring it back to themselves and say, well, this is about healing yourself. And how do you overlay the earth changes on your own body? What's shifting and realigning you? And, kind of use it as a metaphor to kind of guide them back into themselves, and so that they don't go into a fear-based mentality. Yes, it's very easy to do that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And then what I'd like to add to that, speaking of Kalaman's latest book, Carl Kalaman in The Purposeful Universe really has explained, what's been going on with evolution for the last 16 billion years. He's nailed it. And you're reading it and you know what I mean. And it's not an easy book to read. But the other piece I'd like to add here is that for a large number of people, their own personal work and their own personal processing is the key. Because let's remember that each one of us is creating this reality that we're in the middle of. So what each person thinks about and feels is of critical importance. And I've dedicated my life to helping people understand as much as possible what they're feeling. That's really been my quest. And so what I find with people is 10% of people, maybe 20% of people, maybe 30%, I have no idea how many it is. There's a lot of people out there who can't figure out how to process their emotions and their feelings without understanding what's going on. You see what I mean? Mm-hmm. In other words, it's just a lot of humans who seem to, especially Western humans, who are really dysfunctional unless they understand what is happening. And that's why I think catastrophobia is so important.
I also, I don't mean to cut you off, but I also think that catastrophobia is important because one of the main points I walked away from with that book was if you don't know your true history, if you don't know your true point of origin and the true storyline, it's very difficult to connect to yourself. I don't think you really can.
Yeah, and of course, I don't ever want to overestimate how many people are like that. But then let's go back to what started catastrophobia. My Cherokee grandfather, who was half Cherokee and half Celtic, my Cherokee grandfather said that if we didn't recover our story during this moment in time, and for him, now my grandfather had 5 children, one of whom was my father. And my grandfather was a Cherokee record keeper, so he had to pass his tradition to the next generation. My grandfather skipped his own children and passed it to me because he knew that I would be alive during this period of time. So then what happened is he trained me from age 3 to age 18 in the Cherokee records, which is what catastrophobia is coming out of. And my grandfather said that if people in our current time, which is now, especially 2010, didn't recover their story, then they would, in a sense, he didn't say what would happen, but he just said, as you said a minute ago, they would just be so dysfunctional that they couldn't cope with anything, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, they don't know where they come from. They don't know who they are. They don't know where they come from.
Yeah, so I may be underestimating how many people really need to know this, if you know what I mean. Like, look at the response to Avatar, because Avatar, regardless of whatever faults it may have, Avatar really captures the vibration of the regional underworld, the inhabitants of Pandora, the way that they lived and the way they existed with nature really is the most evocative and powerful recreation of the regional underworld consciousness that it just stunned me, even though there's things about it that I didn't necessarily like. It just stunned me. And so if you take Avatar in mind and the luminescent world of living in nature by the beings of Pandora, and then you think of that being shattered by the incoming fragments from the veil of supernova. So it's so incredible, isn't it, that this movie came forth right at the point when the shattering started. Mm-hmm. If you see what I mean. So even if people don't have the story, they still have been able to pick up that memory of the regional underworld. Because why is that important? Well, the consciousness of the regional underworld is going to flood our planet during 2011 with waves of energy. It's coming back. That's really what the universal underworld is all about. Because if you look at Kalaman's theory, there are 9 underworlds, the first one being the cellular, and the middle underworld being the regional, the 100,000-year cycle, and then the universal underworld being the 9th underworld. Those 3 underworlds all have similar frequencies. So
it's really amazing. It's just really amazing. Yeah, it really is. Yeah.
Well, it's a miracle, I think. I mean, when you think of, I was so horrified by the Academy Awards because for him not to get the best director, I just thought it was the most ridiculous thing. I mean, how do you like that? What do we get as for the best movie? We get War, right? Of course.
Of course. Yeah.
We should expect it. Yes. But it was really so heartbreaking for James Cameron because when you think of what he had to go through to produce that movie, it's just awesome.
Well, even if he's not acknowledged by the industry, he's certainly acknowledged by us as viewers who continue to go see his movie, and the numbers speak for themselves. So he is definitely supported by his fans. That's for sure. Yeah,
for sure.
You know what I think is coming up now for a lot of people too, and I'd like your thoughts on this, is you talk about the influence of this, star system, the energy that comes down, the supernova. What I've been feeling lately is the sun and the energy of the sun coming onto the planet, and how there seems to be a tangible feel almost to the light, the quality of light that we're receiving now. And, in my meditations and stuff, it kind of stems from, the galactic center, and how that's changing and shifting and evolving as a universe, as an entity itself. We say the Earth is alive. Well, so is our solar system. Mm-hmm. And I would love your thoughts on if you have anything to comment on the quality of light coming into our planet right now.
I'm feeling some of the similar things that you're describing. I don't know how well I could describe them, but I'm feeling that the quality of light is changing, and I'm also not worried about the sun exploding or any of that stuff. Let's get that stuff off.
No.
In other words, I'm just not worried about any of that stuff. I think we may go through some extraordinary experiences with the sun, but I'm just not worried about it from a cataclysmic point of view. But it's bigger than that, Hillary. Our whole solar system is evolving right now. Now, when the cataclysm occurred, the culmination 11,500 years ago, when the really big supernova fragment came through, as I told you, all of the planets, the orbits were flipped, and some became more elliptical. And the main scientist who keeps track of what's going on in the solar system is a Russian scientist named Dmitriev, Dmitriev. So if people want to follow up on this, go Google Dmitriev, and you'll get a bunch of information about the solar system. But I'll just give you a few of them that are relevant here. Now, as you know, in terms of Kalaman's theory, the galactic underworld starts in 1999. And when the galactic underworld started, we entered into a very, very intense time acceleration. And the reason that everything's been so intense for us since then is we've been going through the days and the nights of the galactic underworld, as you know. Well, while we've been going through this acceleration on our planet, all the planets in the solar system have been changing rapidly. Changes on the surface of Jupiter, different geological changes on Mars. And here's an interesting one. Since 1999, the axis of both Neptune and Uranus have flipped. Now, I don't know exactly when. I just found out about this. Let's see if I can give the right reference on this. I'm holding a cup of coffee and an article at the same time, if you know what I mean, because it's 7:30 my time, which is great. But the author of this information is Mark Helly, Heley. And he has written, and I can't recommend this because it's going to be down at the post office waiting for me, but judging by this guy's article, this has got to be a brilliant book. And he wrote a book called The Everything Guide to 2012, which, have you seen that?
Not yet, but I've heard of it, yes.
Yeah, okay, so I'm picking that up at the post office on Friday, and down in Bellingham. I live up in Canada. And the reason that I'm so impressed with this article is he's taken responsibility for really evaluating a lot of the people in this field scientifically. Like he did a very, very good job on Greg Braden and the whole issue of the speed up of the Schumann resonance, for example, which confused so many people. Mm-hmm. And what Helly does is he says, look, these different people, I probably am in the book too, I would assume, especially for the photon band, but I don't know. But he's saying these people were picking up on something that was real even though they didn't know what the cause was. And then what they did was they went searching for causes, which is exactly what I do. I try to find the best scientific reason for why a certain thing goes on, as you know. But what Mark says in his article, this is coming from New Dawn, the magazine from Australia, which is a great magazine. And what Mark says in the article is that Dmitriev says that Uranus and Neptune have both flipped their poles since 1999. Now, I don't know when that happened, and I can't wait to find out. But here's the deal. Uranus and Neptune have both been in mutual reception through most of the galactic underworld. In other words, Uranus has been in Pisces, and then Neptune has been in Aquarius. Now, Pisces rules Neptune, and Uranus rules Aquarius. So we've been having the most intense level of understanding the effect of Uranus and Neptune during the galactic underworld. It's just been extremely intense. Then isn't it fascinating that they were out there flipping their poles while we're going through this on our planet? You see that?
I think it's really, really incredible stuff. Yeah.
The synchronicity of these events, like, for example, one of my main contributions as an astrologer is work on Chiron. And Chiron is a little body that astronomers called it a planet when they sighted it. And so we astrologers took off with that. 4 of us went to work on it as a planet because they said it was. Sometimes they say it's a planetoid. Sometimes they don't know what it is. But we astrologers know for sure that it has an absolute huge impact on consciousness. And so as a Chiron researcher, I've been the one who has worked on, there's been a group of us, but I'm the one who has attempted to define Chiron's rulership and really use it as an astrological factor in astrology. And Chiron rules the wounded healer complex. It rules that point in each one of us where the deepest wounding exists. And then when we start working with Chiron, we go deeper and deeper, like going through the levels of an onion to get to that original wounding. And so, of course, what I'm saying in Catastrophobia is that original wounding is actually the cataclysms. And then we've had all these onion layers of civilizational experience that's added to it through the years. But here's the most amazing thing, Hillary, and we're having a really esoteric conversation here, but it's really kind of fun. If you go to the Sumerian records, you will find a clear description of the cataclysm in 9500 BC. This is the Enuma Elish. And in the Enuma Elish, Chiron goes into its orbit during the cataclysm. In other words, speaking of the creativity of our solar system, a body of consciousness went into form during the cataclysms, and it has been the key for us now to go to the deepest level of healing. Isn't that amazing?
What a wonderful time to be alive.
Yeah, look, I'm glad. I was just going to say that to you a minute ago. Speaking of the fact, I don't like to talk about difficult things, and I think these earthquakes have probably only just started. And I live in a tectonically active zone, and it may happen to me, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I don't like to think about any of this, but I am so grateful to be alive right now because we are living in the middle of the recovery of our story, regardless of what the global elite tries to suppress or anybody tries to keep from us. We're getting it back regardless of that.
You know, Barbara, as you know, I take groups to different sacred sites around the world, and we have a big elders gathering coming up in October in Egypt. And I know that you used to travel to these places and facilitate groups, and I thought you might want to comment, too, on why it's so important, because I feel like it's really important for myself and others to experience certain points around the planet, which just so happens to align with major sacred sites. Stonehenge, Machu Picchu. What is the significance of being at places like that? I have my own theories, but I know I would like to hear yours, of being at those places during these times. Yeah,
well, as you know, I've done that myself. And when are you going to be in Egypt? Because I'm going to teach in India in October.
Oh, October 4th through the 12th.
Oh, interesting. I'll be teaching in India while you're in Egypt. Isn't that interesting? And I've never gone to India before. And what I've done in this lifetime, and I'm sure you're doing the same thing, is that when I got to the point where I had to go to a sacred site, when it was time, I got there no matter what. If I had to drag a group, I didn't care how I did it. I was going to get there, if you know what I mean. And so I've done that in Egypt and around different places. And the reason this is so important for you and the people who are going with you is that sacred sites are points on the planet that have tremendous like ley line energy and geological energy, and people built temples there because of the power of the earth at those points, and those power points are also all connected up with the solar system itself. You know how complicated the power points are even connected up with the stars. It's the power points on Earth are our way to tune into the records of our planet. And as you know, in my own work in Alchemy of 9 Dimensions, I work with 9 dimensions, and the Earth's core is the first dimension. There's an iron core crystal in the center of the Earth. And so the sacred sites on the planet are in the third dimension. The second dimension is the realm between the core and the crust, which is the tectonic zone, the magma, and all that stuff between the core and the surface. So the sacred sites on the planet are located in places that have direct access to the first dimension, which is the iron core crystal. And the reason that it's done that way is that the iron core crystal contains all of the records of consciousness of all time. You could call it the Akashic records for Earth if you want to. Mm-hmm. And so those sacred sites have direct access to those Akashic records. And when a person, your group or you, go there, it's because you know that at that moment in time, you need to access the records in those locations. And then when you go there and do that, speaking of the awakening that we're living in the middle of, then you open the Akashic records for everybody else on the planet. You see how that works?
Yeah. And so when people say, because I often get asked this question as well, why do I have to physically travel to those places? Why can't I just close my eyes and meditate and connect with those places? What's the difference? And I always say that, we're biological creatures, and to physically experience our environment is so important, and that the magnetic anomalies that they were built on have very significant physical effects on people. Yeah. So it's really important to physically go to these places and to explore them and feel them and just tune in, because you really don't get the same kind of experience just by, you can always close your eyes and meditate and go back once you've been there and connect stronger with that energy. But there's definitely no replacing a firsthand experience with these places. Do you believe that as we go ahead.
And then people know. In other words, you're speaking of the person who wants to meditate. That person really might be picking up on something, but then the other person knows, I got to go there now. Mm-hmm. You know what it feels like. I do. In Egypt, I taught in Egypt about 10 times. Yeah. And you've seen the movie of me teaching in Egypt.
Yes.
Nine Dimensions on the Nile, yeah. And so fortunately I got filmed, because no one would ever be able to see that if they weren't able to see that film. So luckily that happened, if you know what I mean. So you know when you have to go, and when you go, and I'm so glad you're doing that, because I think you're going to be just great doing that with people.
Oh, thank you so much. That's really, I feel very called to go to different places, and I'm involved with the Sisters of Hanoa, and we're doing an Earth Code Awakening series. So we'll be doing Hawaii in 3 weeks. We'll be going to work with the Kahunas in Hawaii. Okay. And then we'll be doing Egypt in October, and then we're doing, actually, speaking of India, we're doing India and Tibet in May of 2011. So,
Once I go to one, I'm doing a conference in India and Bangalore, but once we go once, we usually go a second time, so maybe I'll join you in 2011.
Oh, that would be great. Well, that would be great.
Yeah. And if you see Sam Kai in Hawaii, say hi. If you're going.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay, you'll have to email me that name so I can remember it.
He's the head Kahuna, and so if you see him, he may live on Maui though. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I will for sure. Yes. Yeah. Well, we are filled with that trip. We are closed. Registration is closed, and we do have a full group for Hawaii, so it's going to be quite an amazing journey. But Barbara, getting back to this material and talking about things like this, sacred sites, and feeling the energies and going through all of this, and we only have about 13 minutes left in the show, but what I always like to know also is, what's the big message that we're supposed to be getting at this point? What do you consider the big messages that we're supposed to be getting at this point?
I definitely think the critical issue during 2010 is to remember the story that's in Catastrophobia. And as you know from talking to me so many times, I just don't go on and on about my own book, but this is one of those few cases where I can't think of anybody else who did it. Mm-hmm. Because, okay, now why would a person want to bother with that? Well, if you're feeling really fearful and disturbed, if you're hooked on the news right now, if you're on the edge of your chair waiting for what the hell's going to happen next, or is the financial system going to fall apart or whatever, what's going to happen for you if you're in that state of mind, and a lot of people are right now, is it's going to get worse and more intense all the way up into May. And then in May, it's going to almost be insane, because May corresponds corresponds to the 9500 BC cataclysm. And so the global elite is going to do everything they can to harvest your fear. And we're going to hear every single story and beyond about what we should be afraid of at this point. And I think they probably are using HAARP to make sure that people are afraid. I don't know what they're doing. But the point is they can't do anything to you if you know what's going on. And meanwhile, there's another thing going on in May 2010, which is in I think it's May 6, 2010, we come to the midpoint of the night 6 of the galactic underworld. And the way these underworlds work is that when you get to the midpoint of any underworld, then the coming day starts to affect reality. In other words, the first half of night 6, November through May, has been very dark and very intense and very fear-ridden. But then starting in May, we start picking up on the energy that's going to be coming in during day 7, which starts November 2010. Day 7 is basically 2011. And so the energy is really going to shift inwardly for a lot of people in May because this new energy is going to start coming in. But if you're all tied up in knots, it's going to be difficult to access that. Like I call it the Chicken Little complex. Where Chicken Little was always waiting for the sky to fall in our nursery rhymes when we were kids, remember that? And I call it the Chicken Little syndrome. And so if you're stuck in the Chicken Little syndrome, and a lot of people focusing on 2012 are definitely having that problem because there's so much of a tendency in the 2012 movement to make it look like there's going to be this big explosion during 2012 when that just isn't the issue here at all.
Yeah.
Solomon really has a better understanding of the calendar than the 2012 people do.
Yeah.
It's not that the 2012 dates, by the way, aren't correct from one point of view, too, because there's another whole issue about these dates, and we don't want to get into it. But 2012, according to Solomon's theory, is the first year that we're beyond the 9 underworld acceleration. When we're going to be just dealing with these really high frequencies, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, and I think
cataclysmic confusion is what's making people miss the subtlety and beauty of what's happening right now.
That's true. I really think that's true. And another concept that's been coming up for me personally also lately, and I love to bring these things in just because I like to see where they coincide with the energy of things, is the divine feminine consciousness and the rebirthing of that, the reemerging, I should say, of this kind of switch from a patriarchal kind of society to a matriarchal, energetically at least. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, and it's anthropological too. I mean, I had 4 children, and when my children were young, I carried the baby, and I did all of that. And now, if you go out and watch people in their 30s and 20s with their children, 90% of the time the guy is holding the infant. You notice that?
Yeah.
Maybe more, and maybe stronger up in Canada. But literally, the women deliver the baby, and they go back to work on their high-powered careers. The guys are holding the babies. So it's not everybody, but that is such a profound anthropological shift to have the men nurturing as much as they are. So it's happening in reality as well as in the psychic level.
Do you think that it's been suppressed on purpose, like our history, like our true storyline? Do you think that the divine feminine consciousness has been intentionally suppressed, or it's just been a matter of our progressional evolution?
I feel, and this is the thesis of Catastrophobia really, that once the global elite got the power, then they took the power. And because women birth and so much time has to be taken for that part of our lives, especially until very recently, what happened is we basically had a completely male-dominant culture on this planet universally, starting right around maybe 3,000-4,000 years ago. And we're reaching the point now, we're coming to the end of it because it's so destructive. It's going away simply because it's destroying the planet.
And so how do we bring that back within ourselves?
Well, I think that's, again, each individual. And I really think that what each woman is doing with this and what each supportive man is doing with her is changing things on it's such a profound level. It's another thing I keep watching for is I'm hoping to see a return to the grandparents helping a lot with the children. When the housing crisis really got to be severe last year and people started moving in together, and of course it's coming again, so it'll probably happen again. But I started to see families started moving back together, because when societies are really healthy, the grandparents are helping a lot with the children while the parents undergo the stress of working and supporting the family. So that's another thing I hope we're going to see.
That's a whole nother show, I think. I think we could talk about that during a whole nother show. So,
the Pleiades, by the way, that's how they run.
Yeah. Well, speaking of them, what a great note to end our show on. Now, you began, along the way of all this fantastic career of yours, you were, and I've brought this up on other shows, and for people who are interested in the other points, you can go back into my archives and listen to Barbara's past shows. She covers a lot of the basic information about what the underworlds are, what all the meaning of that is, and the reason I didn't spend a lot of time discussing that in this show was because we've done that prior. So these are kind of a series, if you will, over the past couple of years, actually, that you've been coming on, that you can go back in and listen and progressively follow the energy and the explanations to some things along with her books. But anyway, the Pleiadian energies that you work with, I'm just finishing reading Philip Imbrogno's work, and he's coming on the show later in May, and he talks a lot about the interdimensional beings, and our the other things in this world that exist alongside of us. Do you think that at this time, through from now through the next few years, those veils are thinning, and our experiences of being in touch with angels, with spirits, whatever you want to call them. Some people call them ETs. Some people call, I think the names aren't really relevant, to be honest with you. I think they're all, I think we've really done a poor job of describing what they are. But the Pleiadians you've talked about before, do you think that the veils are thinning? I guess that's my basic question.
Yeah, and I put, as a typical of me, I always have to put things in such a complex way. But the way I work with all of those dimensions is I work with 9 dimensions. And, of course, the angels and spirits and all the life forms are in other dimensions. And so the reason I think Avatar is so powerful is that if you watch Avatar correctly, you can see the beings in Avatar responding to a lot of dimensions as you observe them. And it's so powerful for us to see that because most people have been cut off from that kind of access. And so the Pleiadians said to me back in 1994 that at the end, this is quote, at the end of the Mayan calendar, people who have not accessed 9 dimensions of consciousness won't be here. Now, that sounds like a scary thing, but I don't think it really involves the issue of death and mayhem and all that. I think it has more to do with the idea that a whole awakening is going to happen on our planet. The veils are thinning, and the 9 dimensions are becoming accessible to us. And if you're not tuned into that, you're just missing it. You're just not there, so to speak. And so I didn't even know when the end of the Mayan calendar was until a few years ago when I discovered Kalaman. But I think during 2011, I think all 9 dimensions of consciousness will be open. And so I just finished a new revision of Alchemy of 9 Dimensions, which just released about a week ago.
Congratulations.
It's going to be in the bookstores. You can get it on Amazon now. But what I did with Alchemy of 9 Dimensions, which was originally published in 2004, at that time I didn't have Kalaman's theory yet. And Kalaman's theory is the 9th dimension in my system. So I took Alchemy and I rewrote the 9th dimension with the Mayan calendar factor being the key to it because it's such important information, obviously. And then I also rewrote the 4th dimension because the fourth dimension is the realm of archetypes, and it's the realm of the collective mind. And it's the most difficult dimension to describe. It's the global legal issue. It's all that stuff. And so I only reached clarity on the fourth dimension myself about 6 months ago. So now that I've achieved clarity on the fourth dimension, then I rewrote the fourth dimension so that it was more accurate. So Alchemy has a new edition just coming out.
I'm very excited. That's one of my favorite books, as you know. I really enjoy that one. That was one of the reasons I got in touch with you in the first place, because that book so touched me. Well, congratulations. That's a really phenomenal feat. And I really just want to say it's an honor to, know you and to support your work out in the world, because so many people have been touched by it. And, my listeners are a big fan of yours as well. I get lots and lots of emails from people who really enjoy the information that you share. So in closing, with Barbara Clow, everybody, you can reach her information at handclow2012.com. Her books are all there, and you can join her in India if you like. Her information about joining her workshop is also online. And you're not teaching that much this year, are you, Barbara?
No, I'm not. Yeah, Night 6 has been so stressful because my husband Jerry and I teach together, and we drew back this year because we've also got kids and family and relatives, and we wanted to make sure that we were available at a maximum level for people.
Yeah.
And that's turned out to be true. But that's what I love about my website, Hillary. Even if I'm not out there, anybody can get what I'm thinking about at the current moment for free.
Yeah.
Which I think is great.
Yeah.
Dial it up and check it out. It's there every new moon, and I'm just writing the spring equinox right now.
Oh, great, because I can't wait to read that.
Yeah, right. It'll be fun.
Yeah, and I do, for those who follow my path through things, I also post her stuff on Facebook, and you're welcome to join me on Facebook. I post a lot of great links on there, as well as the archives for my show. So we're at the end, and we'll have to wait until next time. And This is the Mayan calendar in March 2010 with Barbara Clow. Thanks, everyone, for listening. I'm Hillary Raimo. Until next time, namaste.